Second panel, we're going to talk about the issue of Holocaust and genocide issues, with particular emphasis on the modern movement of restitution, genocide restitution in the United States. Obviously, it is an issue of great significance with billions of dollars that are at stake and incredible emotional significance as well. And we have a distinguished panel, a wonderful group of experts on this topic. These are not just academic experts, but also litigation experts who have been extremely involved in issues of Holocaust and genocide. I thought it was quite useful that Yitzhak Alderstein's remarks yesterday evening at the keynote event. He said that the founder of the word genocide, Raphael Lemkin, was originally interested in that issue not only because of the Holocaust, but also because of the issues surrounding the Armenian genocide. And because of Lemkin's work in establishing the Genocide Convention, we have now had a significant and robust debate about righting the wrongs of the past through efforts of litigation, not only holding people accountable criminally, but also now holding people accountable through litigation in places like the United States. All three of our speakers have been actively involved in that issue. Michael Bazyler is a good friend of mine. He's been a visiting professor at Pepperdine. About 5 years ago, he and I organized a conference in this room on genocide and religion, and focused on the role of religion in perpetrating genocide. It also, as well as the role of religion in preventing genocide by the people that were attempting to engage in the rescue of victims. Michael is a world-renowned expert on the Holocaust. He's written books on the subject that are considered to be the definitive works on Holocaust restitution. Holocaust Justice was one of them. The Perspectives on Holocaust Restitution was another one that he and I edited together. He teaches at Chapman Law School, has been involved in litigation, human rights litigation for over 30 years, and has been very actively involved in issues relating to Holocaust litigation as well. He currently is working on a book on the history of genocide and is extraordinarily knowledgeable about all of these subjects. Lisa Stern is a child and a grandchild of a Holocaust victim. For over 50 years, the Stern family attempted to collect life insurance for loved ones who had been murdered by the Nazis, and then in the late 1990s, the family's insurance company received another denial letter suggesting that for Lisa at least, that she had to do something to try to deal with the issues of Holocaust insurance denial. And so for Lisa, who's a Pepperdine law grad, and in fact a distinguished grad who has received Alumni of the Year awards from Pepperdine, it was a very personal issue of insurance claims. And as a result of her work, 12 years of litigation, we have had a tremendous momentum toward Holocaust restitution. Much of the move toward Holocaust litigation stemmed from the insurance context, the insurance and the bank context. And so Lisa's work in California litigation was extraordinarily significant in promoting the movement toward restitution. And from insurance claims, it moved to bank claims, and it moved then to slave labor claims, and it moved to art claims, and now we're still in the throes of dealing with real property claims. So Lisa is a person who will talk about her work with Holocaust insurance claims. Vartkes Yeghiayan is a person who's well known in the Armenian community. He's one of the top lawyers in California, has spent a career, decades working on issues of litigation, and since at least the 1980s, late 1980s, has been working on issues of Armenian genocide litigation. He has had numerous successful claims involving insurance claims surrounding the Armenian genocide, and is just an absolute star among the Armenian legal community. He's a personal friend as well, and is a person who has really fought the cause for Armenian genocide from his earliest days here in California. So if you will please welcome, I think, Michael, you're going to go first, right? And then Lisa, and then Vartkes, right? Please, thank you.
Roger, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I wanted to start off with a story about how this conference, the beginning of how this conference came to be organized. And it's a story that I relish telling. I've told this to a number of Pepperdine professors. But it began last summer in July, as Dean Starr explained to you. He was teaching at Bazyler University on the summer abroad program, where Pepperdine is one of the partners with the program. And I was sitting with Professor Sam Levine and Ken Starr in the faculty conference room at Bazyler at the law school. And we got word from Yale that the Pepperdine Jewish Law Student Association wanted to, you as the president, wanted to now this year be the host of the National JILSA Conference. And so you had mentioned this in an email to Sam. Sam related it to me. And we wanted to present this to Ken. So we're in the conference room talking about this and said this, that we want now to do this. And Ken didn't say a word. All he did was this. That's just a wonderful way that this came about. And that's how we got the green light. And we are here today. I'm honored to be in the presence of these two individuals. I am a professor in the Ivory Tower, looking at, and been looking now for over a decade at the issues of restitution of material wrongs, not just from the Holocaust, but from other massive human rights abuses. And these two individuals, both sole practitioners, I think it's, for those of you that are law students, beginning lawyers, very inspiring, on their own, came up with an idea of fighting for justice for material losses from two different genocides, one from the Holocaust, one from the Armenian genocide, and with other lawyers put together the teams in order to achieve some measure of justice. There's a recent book by the title of that name, for victims of Holocaust and victims of the Armenian genocide. Many, many years after those wrongs had occurred, and where that measure of justice had occurred was in the United States. The Holocaust did not take place in the United States. The Armenian genocide didn't take place in the United States, but it is here and in the courts of the United States where it's occurring. One of the running themes last night at the conference was sort of the lawyer jokes that people were making. And so my presentation is, and I think the presentation of these individuals, is a counterpoint to every lawyer's joke that you ever heard. That it's the American legal system, and only the American legal system, that made these victories, and I think they are legal victories, possible. And they're because of the specific characteristics of American law. But so I want to give you a broad overview of Holocaust restitution, and then how it leads to other claims from other historical injustices, and then leave it up to the practitioners in order to do so. And so I'll do this through a PowerPoint presentation, and I've sort of taken some of the most important slides, and I'll go through this. So this is a photo of Hungarian Jews in 1944 arriving at Auschwitz. You see the Jewish star that they're wearing. We don't know the fate of these three elderly gentlemen. You see they seem to be very nicely dressed. We do know that in the selection process that occurred at Auschwitz, these three men probably were gassed, taken to the gas chambers. And I want to read a quote, something that I was very moved with, from a narrative by a Polish dissident who was in Auschwitz. She was a political prisoner fighting the Nazis, Sewerina Szmaglewska, who in 1946 wrote a biography, Smoke Over Auschwitz, autobiography. And in one of her passages, in one striking passage, she recalls with bitter irony the sight of Orthodox Jews from Hungary waiting to be ushered into the gas chambers. And in this narrative, she says as follows: you can do nothing to prevent them from becoming a herd of sheep going to the slaughter. You cannot make them jump at the throats at the eyes of the hangman, but you can gather the luxurious belongings, the broken chocolate bars, the trampled rings of figs, while you cannot be a brother, you can't be a hyena. So I think the quote illustrates that the massive theft that occurred from the victims of the Holocaust, both at the concentration camps, the death camps, and throughout Europe, including the gentleman represented here. This is the site of, after the Allied victory in one of the concentration camps, the various gold rings that were taken from the victims. And it's a U.S. Army soldier just going through with his hands, you can see. It's a representation of the gold that was stolen by the Nazis. Now, after the war, as you know, the Allies decided to create a tribunal in Nuremberg, the International Military Tribunal. That tribunal, that trial started in November 1945, ended in October 1946. 24 Nazis stood accused, 21 stood trial at the dock, and the verdicts that were issued on September 30th and October 1st found 19 of the 22 guilty, 3 of the 21 defendants that were in court were acquitted, and then death sentences were carried out. The Holocaust was a background story at the Nuremberg trials, at the main trial. It was not the major story, but it was definitely part of that. And the theft of the Jewish property really was very much in the background, just briefly mentioned in some of the proceedings. After the IMT trial had ended, in the Americas and in Nuremberg, there were 12 what are called subsequent trials of doctors, of lawyers, of government officials, of generals, and part of those trials were the trials of the industrialists. Trial number 5 was of the Flick case, 6 members of the Flick industrial concern. Trial number 6 were the 24 defendants from the IG Farben industrial concern. And the one that's up here is trial number 10 of Alfred Krupp and 11 other defendants that were from the famous Krupp industrial concern. And they were charged with enslavement and other war crimes, including the plunder of public and private property, and really taking the individuals that, both Jews and non-Jews, who were used as slaves, working in horrible work-through death conditions in order to achieve the working of the Krupp factories and other industrial concerns during that time. And this is Alfred Krupp on trial at trial number 10 that took place from 1947 to 1948. He was found guilty, and he was given a sentence of 12 years in prison and had all his wealth and property confiscated. So that's 1948. In 1951, he was released from prison by John McCloy, the head of the U.S. military occupation in Germany, and then his properties was returned to him. And within a few years of his release, the Krupp Corporation, it became the 12th largest corporation in the world. And here is a Time cover story of Industrials Krupp, talking about the German miracle that had occurred in post-war, and how the Krupp Empire, and particular Mr. Krupp, and how well he treated his workers, and that had occurred during the time that he had been released. Really, the whole story of what happened during World War II was quickly forgotten. And so, and it was forgotten for over 50 years, until we fast forward to the 1990s, where the issue of Holocaust restitution, and again, the assets plundered from the Jews, was first began to be looked at. And there have been lots of articles and books written, and the question that was asked is, why so many years afterwards? And there's a variety of factors that have come about, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, archival materials that had come forth. It's just a matter of things coming together, books being written at the time. But a lot of it has to do with just the time passing for the Holocaust survivors, the descendants and the victims of the Holocaust. I want to read a quote from Abraham Foxman, the head of the Anti-Defamation League. And he was asked that question, and he answered it in 1998 as follows. He goes, "We have to remember why we're dealing with it now. There are some practical reasons, and that is after 50 years, the British opened some of their books. The Soviet Union's disarray has made more documents available. But there's another reason that we didn't deal with this issue for 50 years. Because the trauma of the human tragedy was so tremendous, so enormous, so gargantuan, that nobody wanted to talk about the material loss for fear that would lessen the human tragedy. Because when you begin talking about property, then what about life? And so for at least 2 generations, we didn't deal with it. Not that we didn't know that there were bank accounts, that there was insurance, that there was property. My mother's family had a factory in Warsaw. My father had some stores in Baranowitz. But nobody ever raised it. Nobody ever said, look what we lost. I don't remember conversations of material loss. Now I realize how significant the loss was. But nobody talked about it, because what they talked about was that they had lost 16 members of their family. So we now have this phenomenon in the 1990s of looking at this issue. And it's interesting how it arose, because the focus was not on Germany, which you think was the most logical country, and German companies, but on Switzerland, which was neutral during the war. And there were 2 specific issues that Switzerland was being accused of. One was that of being kind of the launderer, not the money launderer, but the gold launderer of gold that the Nazi Germany had stolen from the various countries, from the treasuries of the various countries which they conquered, and also from the victims of Jews and both non-Jews. And the gold rings that I showed you in the previous slide is a good example of that. As a result of this pressure, the Swiss government created a historical commission, the Bergeret Commission, in 1996. And in 2002, it presented its report. And the report now by this governmental commission in Switzerland says as follows: Switzerland was the leading center of German gold transactions abroad during World War II. And the Swiss National Bank, the equivalent would be like our Federal Reserve Bank, was the biggest client, buying 1.2 billion Swiss francs worth, or about 280 million in wartime prices, or more than $2.5 billion today. The report found that almost 120 tons of kilogram of fine gold worth of 1.2 million at today's prices could be identified as being melted down by the Nazi bankers from the gold teeth and wedding rings torn away from the victims in Nazi concentration camps. And the report ended there was no longer any doubt. The governing board of the Swiss National Bank was informed at an early point in time that gold from the central banks of occupied nations was being held by the Reichsbank, and the Swiss National Bank was also aware of other methods used by the Germans to confiscate the gold from private individuals before and after the outbreak of the war. The other methods, of course, is the euphemistic way of referring to the brutal ways in which gold was taken from the Jews, including the ripping of the gold from the teeth of the victims. So you see the Times story that talked about this at the time, and it brings the issue to the forefront. And Switzerland was being put now in the limelight. The second issue that Switzerland was accused of was that of taking money that was put by Jews of Europe for safekeeping in Swiss banks and not returning it after the war. The slide here is of Estelle Sapir testifying in 1996 before the Senate Banking Committee with the photo of her father, Joseph Sapir, and telling the story of how prior to him being shipped off, she saw him last, and he said to her as a young girl, she was 19 years old at the time, not to worry, that I have provided for you, and giving her names of the and the amounts of the money that was held by Credit Suisse in Geneva. After the war, she makes her way. She was the only member of the family to survive, and made her way, and somehow also had a ledger in the father's handwriting of the money that he had placed, showing the equivalent of about 83,000 in Swiss francs. And she was asked a very simple legal question, which is, okay, you're the heir of Joseph Sapir, and you claim that you're entitled to this bank account. Prove to us that he's dead. Where's the death certificate? Where she was, flabbergasted. They didn't give out death certificates. And at that point, she was turned away. And it was not until 1996, when she testified and talked about this, that the Swiss began looking at this issue, created a commission to try to determine how much of these dormant accounts that they held, and then settled with Estelle separately in 1997, paying her, and then in 1998 reaching a global settlement for $1.25 billion, in which basically the 2 largest Swiss banks put that money into a bank account in New York, as a class action settlement where the money has been dispersed, now still being dispersed, now more than 10 years later. As a result of this, as the legal saying goes, the floodgates of litigation had opened, and many of the same lawyers that had sued these Swiss banks now began filing lawsuits against other individuals. This is my cartoon representing it. I guess this is the lawyer's joke of the presentation. But it's really the flip side, the good side of it. That the hero of this whole story is the American justice system and the particular principles of the American justice system. The ability of foreign citizens to come to the United States and file suit for human rights abuses, the recognition of jurisdiction over foreign defendants that do business in the United States, even over claims that occurred abroad, the powerful mechanism of class action lawsuits, the ability of lawyers like Lisa and Vartkes to take on the cases on a contingency basis, a legal culture, I think, is really important, in which lawyers, and I think Professor Dershowitz is a good example of this, are willing to take high-risk cases with low probability of success in order to test the limits of the law. And I think the culture is really important in that if you look at British lawyers, you look at lawyers in Europe, they just don't have that. And it's the flip side, as I said, of the lawyer's jokes that you all hear. The fixed and affordable court filing fees that are possible in the United States, the ability to have a jury trial in civil litigation, and also the existence of an independent judiciary, which does not take marching orders from the political branches of government and ends up looking at these cases based upon their particular merits. And so the litigation began, and part of the litigation involved insurance, and this is what Lisa will talk about. I just want to focus on one part of it. This is the decree, the post-Kristallnacht decree in 1938. It's a translation. You see the three sections, in which after the burning down of the Jewish businesses and synagogues, and you have a decree being issued where the German insurance companies had a problem, which is the various businesses were insured for casualty, property damage. And so the insurance companies came to the German government and saying, look, what have you done? We now have to pay. And so the decree is issued in November 12, saying that as a result of the fault of the Jews, the money is now going to be turned over from these insurance companies to the government, and then the punitive fee that the Jews have to pay as a result of that. Now, you had individuals who had also purchased insurance policies and also had tried to get payment on the policies afterwards. These were life insurance policies. Some were what are called dowry policies that no longer are popular today. And many of the clients that Lisa represented, still represents, had copies of those policies. This is the policy of Dr. Jed Brown's, which you gave me from an Italian insurance company, Assicurazioni Generali from Trieste, which is sort of known as a Jewish company because it was started by Jewish merchants in the 19th century in Italy. And you had Jewish communities throughout Europe as kind of favoring that insurance company and purchasing policies from them, where after the war, as Lisa's story, she will tell you, the insurance company said, well, where's the death certificate? We can't go ahead and pay on the policy. And it was very sort of ironic, chilling, that the same kind of excuses the Swiss banks gave were similar to the excuses that the insurance companies gave for not paying on the policies. This is, Lisa, you're there behind on that screen in the hearings that took place before the California Commission of Insurance, because all these insurance companies do business in the United States. They're regulated state by state, and so they had to come, and just like the banks, the Swiss banks had to appear before the Senate Banking Committee, the insurance companies had to appear before these hearings and explain why I have not paid the policies. And here's Lisa with Dr. Browns, and there's Cy Frumkin, another Holocaust survivor, explaining as to what's going on, and obviously getting a lot of negative publicity against the insurance companies. Litigation was filed, and this is inside the courtroom. Lisa and her co-counsel and the counsel for Generali arguing before the late Judge Cooper on the case itself. As a result of this, there was a documentary made of this on moral grounds, which has been shown here and other places, and I don't know if Lisa will tell you, but I will tell you, it's been optioned by Sony into a feature film, where Lisa will be a sort of the prime hero of the story, the Aaron Brockovich of this story. So I'm sure that at some point we'll be seeing the film on this. So after the insurance litigation, you had now lawsuits being filed against the German insurance companies. This is not an ad by Mercedes-Benz. It sure looks like a Mercedes-Benz, but it's an ad filed to name and shame the various German companies who had employed slave labor, who had profited from the Holocaust, going back now to the Krupp story that I told you, and the other German companies. As a result of this litigation and political pressure and the involvement of the Clinton administration, you had a settlement in 2000 where the German government and the German companies agreed to establish a fund for 10 billion Deutschmarks in order to pay survivors who had worked as slave laborers and forced laborers during the Nazi years. And so payments had been made over time, and these were individual payments, not large amounts, anywhere from something like $7,500 to $2,500, depending on the work regime that these individuals had survived. Think about this does not occur until 2000, of all the different survivors, both Jews and non-Jews, of Nazi persecution, who had helped the German economy in really ways by their sweat of their labor, who survived, who did not get any compensation as a result of it, either from the government or from the various companies. But so that was the litigation against the Germans, and that led concurrently to litigation for Nazilooted Art. Hitler was a failed artist. He didn't make it into the Vienna School of Arts, but he fancied himself to be a collector of art, and so there was extensive looting of art throughout Europe. In fact, there was going to be a museum built in Linz, Austria, Hitler's hometown, to the sort of culture, German culture, and the kind of art that the Germans had favored. And during the war, as a result of the bombing of German cities, the Nazi Germany began storing the artworks in salt mines. This is a U.S. soldier after the war looking in one of the salt mines, and caves for protection from Allied bombing raids. And these mines and caves offered the appropriate humidity and the temperature conditions for these artworks. So that's how they were saved. After the war, there was an effort on the part of the United States and other Allied countries to return the art to its proper owners, but so much of the art had been stolen that it really was dispersed throughout the world that much of it has not been returned. And this is an issue that's still going on today. In 1998, a conference was held in Washington, sponsored by the U.S. government on this issue. And last summer in Prague, there was a follow-up conference trying to determine what to do with this issue. Not just art from museums, but art also that's in galleries and in private collections. Of the different cases involved in this, probably the most famous one is one started by an attorney here in Los Angeles, Randy Schoenberg, another sole practitioner, two-person firm, who actually went solo to do this, representing a friend of the family, Maria Altman, who had sued the Austrian government as a result of 5 paintings that had been taken from Maria Altman's aunt and uncle upon the Germans, the Nazis taking power after the Anschluss in Austria. And the litigation began and went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which allowed the case to proceed. And in June 2006, the case had settled. Austria had agreed to agree to an arbitration decision. The Austrian arbitrators ruled that the painting should be returned to Maria Altman, who's now 91 years old, lives in Los Angeles. And they were packed up and returned here. This painting, Adele Black Power 1, which is of Maria's aunt, was eventually sold for $135 million, which at that time was the highest amount paid for any work of art, and it was paid by Ronald Lauder, and it's now hanging in the Newa Gallery in his museum in New York. If you have not seen it, I urge you to see that. No copy can do the justice how beautiful this painting is. The 4 other paintings were also put on auction, and they had sold for about $190 million. But the issue of Nazilooted art continues. I just want to point out 2 examples. In April 2009, here in California, the Hearst Castle. How many of you have been to the Hearst Castle? they found that Randolph Hearst in 1935 had bought 3 paintings that also had been stolen from the Oppenheimer family, Jacob and Rosa, by the Nazis. And after doing a provenance investigation, decided they were going to give back. And there was a ceremony with Governor Schwarzenegger attending there in April 2009, in which the 3 paintings were returned to the heirs of the family. And interestingly enough, Southern Methodist University in the area, which was going to be the future home of the George W. Bush Presidential Library, discovered that in its Meadows Museum, they also had 2 paintings that had been stolen by the Nazis from the Rothschild family in 1941, estimated to be worth about $10 million. And these paintings had been in the museum for over 2 decades. But if you look at the back of the painting, on one of them, it appears that it has the Nazi code in the back of the painting, evidencing that it's been belonging to the Rothschild family. Nobody ever paid attention to it for all those years, or in terms of willful blindness, nobody cared to look over there. The other painting looks like this designation had been rubbed off. And at this point, we're not sure what's going to happen. They're still negotiating whether the Meadows Museum at SMU is going to return that. Well, as a result of all these claims being made, somewhere between $8 to $10 billion of assets and payments had been made to Holocaust survivors, heirs, other individuals, also, as I mentioned, people that were not Jewish, who had suffered during World War II for the material losses, both in the Holocaust and other losses during the war. And this is just kind of a broad overview, a quick overview that I've given you. But what resulted from that is you had claimants from other historical atrocities began looking and saying, why not us? And so you had, this is one more slide. Elizabeth Taylor had a painting of Van Gogh that a family in Canada had made a claim against that. Eventually, she won because the Ninth Circuit had held that the statute of limitations barred the claim. But you had other claimants being made. You had, afterwards, discovery that, that Jews from Europe had also put money in Mandate Palestine, and that the Israeli banks that were created after the creation of the State of Israel had also had claims against them, individuals who had sought the money back from these banks. And it's interesting, banks are banks. And so they also produced legal obstacles. This is a cover story from the Jerusalem Report. See the cheating our own, Israel stalls on Holocaust reparations. And this process of trying to return money that had been put by Jews from Europe in banks in Mandate Palestine, and even property, real estate had been bought, still continues. There's a government corporation has been set up, and they're working through that. The process has taken now over 7 years, and very little has been done. I'm not sure how much of it is sort of the result of general, Israeli government bureaucracy, and how much of it is just part of the regular problem of restitution, which exists in all these other cases. Claims began being made against Japan. Individuals who served in the Allied forces in the United States, in the British Army, in the Australian Army, Canadian Army, had been captured, were put on slave ships to Japan to work in the salt mines, other mines in Japan, and claims started being made against Japanese companies. They were not successful. Unlike the German companies who came to the negotiating table, the Japanese refused to negotiate, and to this day, we really engage in a denial of the historical wrongs which they committed. The not teaching about it in their history books to their children. And so that issue is one that has not been resolved. African American reparations claims began to be raised, including a colleague of Professor Dershowitz at Harvard, looking at these issues, and they were revived. And so the advocates for African American reparations saying, well, why not us? And so a class action lawsuit was filed in federal district court in Chicago, And the judge there in 2004 and again in 2006 dismissed the lawsuits. You can see the differences. You don't have any actual victims of slave, labor, of slavery, pre-war civil slavery being alive. And so on the basis of lack of standing, statute of limitations, those lawsuits have been dismissed. So if there's going to be any kind of a resolution of these claims, perhaps under President Obama, it does not look like it's going to go through the litigation process, but through the political process. One of the type of claims that was successful, and this is where Vartkes will talk about, is the claimants, Armenians, ancestors of those who had been victims of the Armenian genocide. This is the Marutian family that Vartkes represented, suing New York Life. And it's a story that I'd never heard about, that in the Ottoman Empire, that the Christian minorities were targeted for sale of insurance, for doing business, by American companies, by European companies, not just insurance companies, by banks. And so you have so many years later, the attorneys, claimants from other groups saying, well, look what happened in Holocaust restitution, baby, it's possible here. So in this particular lawsuit that Vartkes and his co-counsel had filed, the Marutian family against New York Life had achieved a successful settlement. And Vartkes will tell you more about this. We don't know where the story would end. In 2007, you had now the opening of the Bad Arolsen archives that were held under the auspices of the Red Cross, where there are 50 million documents concerning that data, information about 17.5 million people regarding the persecution that occurred to them during the Holocaust. And we wonder what materials is there that can go ahead and begin the rise of other claims. So even though we talk about this campaign beginning in the 1990s, I think it's still very much today, and who knows where it will end up. So I will stop at this point. Lisa?
Thank you, Professor. If you'll allow me in this intimate setting to be intimate, rather than being academic, which I am not, I'd rather share with you how it is that a little girl from Orange County comes to this issue. And the point is, it was through serendipity, and it was destiny. It is a given that this area of restitution should have been dealt with 60 years ago, but those who are better resourced and smarter, certainly than myself. And it was only because I looked around and no one else was doing anything that I fell into it. This is how it happened. And there's a wonderful lesson in this for us all. In 1996, besides the Swiss banks being investigated, Uncle Bart, my uncle, died. And it was at his stone setting in 97 in Israel that the family was convened and the subject of life insurance came up. Not to be nosy, but we asked Auntie Anne if Uncle Bart had purchased insurance. And it was during that conversation at the cemetery when Uncle Adolf, who was then quite elderly and quasi-famished, blurts out, "Those sons of bitches never paid on Dad's policy." And his sister, our Auntie Edith, says, I still have a letter from the 1970s from that insurance company that said that they can't find any policies that Dad had taken out, and even if they did, we need a death certificate to make a claim. And to his credit, my brother-in-law said, "What, money?" And he asked, what is this about? And it ends up that not some, but many, many, many Jewish families had purchased insurance. This makes perfect sense in the context of a pre-war Europe. In a patriarchal society also, if Daddy didn't earn, kids and Mommy didn't eat. So you would buy these annuities that would pay your retirement, or if Daddy died. And also you had massive currency fluctuations. So we now know in retrospect that in countries where Jews constituted less than 1% of the population, they constituted a third or more of the clientele of these insurance companies. It was very, very skewed. And so we all know what happened during the Holocaust. The little-known story is for those who were, let's say, over 14 years old and under 40, those who survived, when they were liberated, they weren't just free to go and able to go just anywhere they wanted. They needed to be sponsored. And so for those few months to a few years, they were placed in displaced persons camps. And for those many families who knew they had insurance, they would actually go to these offices and they would say, my parents have been murdered, whomever had been murdered, I want to collect on my policies because I need medicine. I need food. I need shelter. I need to be able to immigrate. And these companies, and now that we've had some experience, there was a common response. First, they would say, can you produce your policy? And they would say, no. No matter of fact, Auschwitz did not have filing cabinets for the inmates, and they knew that. And then they would say, well, can you prove they were dead? Do you have a death certificate? And they'd say, well, no, we don't. Hitler was not signing out death certificates, but the Red Cross did have certain lists. And besides, these are annuities, due and payable at a specific time. And surely, whether they're alive or not alive, you owe us that money. And what happened to Uncle Adolf is not unique, it's rather typical. What happened is he presents himself at the office. He had lost his parents, he had lost his brothers and sisters, he had lost his wife, he had lost his 7-month-old baby. He was still in his prison garb after having been in Auschwitz. He walks from the first time he's released from the hospital to the office of Generali, the insurance company, where he personally had gone before the war to prepay premiums. He presents himself and says, I need that money because my brother needs surgery. And not only did they run him through do you have the copy of the policy? No. Do you have a death certificate? No. They did something I think was really quite unconscionable. And they had a guard come over and toss him out on the street. And he described in a deposition how that was probably one of the many lowest points in his life, feeling absolutely abandoned, absolutely alone in the world, and absolutely it was a hoveled mess. So he tells a story. We're just like, no, this can't happen. What was the name of that company? And he mentions the word Generali, which had meant nothing to us. In the United States, I don't think anyone had ever heard that company. But one of the many miracles was that day in the Jerusalem Post, there was this big article about that same company buying Israel's largest insurance company called Migdal for cash, $340 million. We said, no way. I mean, the same company that day, this can't be. And so my brother-in-law went on a 1-year campaign to shame the company into investigating whether or not they had these policies, could they be proved, and could people who could prove they had these policies be paid. And during that year, there was letters going back and forth from my mother-in-law, Olive Shalom, to the company and back and forth. One of those letters, which is now a famous legal exhibit, my mother-in-law writes to them and says, please, won't you consider, we know we had these policies. We know it because the people who paid for them are alive. Won't you consider paying? And whilst the director general of this company is writing my mother-in-law, again denying the existence of policies, and that same day where they had taken out full-page ads that you may or may not remember, denying the existence of documentation or a legal or moral responsibility to pay these claims even if they could find them, that same day, a journalist goes over to Trieste, Italy, asked to speak to the eldest employee, and that employee, who is then retired, says, psst, I know where they're hiding the policies. They walk over to a 6-story warehouse, they break in, and in a matter of minutes, they find the first of several policies owned by the Stern family, and, like manna from heaven, it gets faxed to my mother-in-law in London. So imagine, okay, so she receives copies of these policies through her fax, and by the way, it has Generali's fax stamp on it, and we don't know if that was done with or without permission, but we do know it's there. And then the next day, one of the letters from the Director General denying the existence of policies lands at her doorstep. Now, you would think, and you are going to be lawyers and you're going to be counseling corporations, at this point, what you would do is fall on the sword and be just a little bit contrite, just a little bit. All you have to do is either recognize someone's pain, acknowledge what happened, or ignore them. But instead, what this company did is write another, what is now a famous legal exhibit, the tone of which was, "Dear Mrs. Stern, be glad to have survived the Holocaust. Do not be a greedy Jew." Duh. You can't do that. I don't care who you are. You can't be mean to someone's grandma. And so I had kind of watched this going on in Europe, but when they did that to Mom, I did what I'm sure each and every one of you would have done, only better. And I said, you know what, this has to stop. You can't do this. You cannot do this. And so I recognized my limitations. I'm a sole practitioner, and I have a puppy sitting on my lap in my home office. And so I persuaded the Chernoff, Art, and Darris law firm to partner with me. They would form the Brain Trust. I would be the Duracell Bunny. And we were going to make this historic wrong right. Now, we were not naive. We knew that no other case had won in those 50 years. We knew that the little thing called the statute of limitations might be a problem, or venue, or other things. But we said, you know what, we're going to have a press conference. We're going to file the world's largest bad faith insurance lawsuit. And by the way, we're going to do it on behalf of the family. We're not going to join the class action, which we had been asked to do, because from the survivor's perspective, and you have to listen to your client, you have to put yourself in your client's shoes. What did Hitler do? When you arrived, if you weren't immediately gassed, you got your head shaved. What else? Your name was taken away. What did happen? You got a tattoo. Why? Because you lost your humanity. And so the concept of a class action to a Holocaust survivor in this situation felt like they were being treated like a widget. And so one must be very sensitive about that. They just want their story to be told. They just want the world to know how wonderful their families were, at great sacrifice these policies were paid for, just so that their families could be protected, and what an injustice this was. Okay, so we filed a lawsuit to great fanfare. We did receive, as expected, a motion to dismiss. And the companies hired the most wonderfully skilled, most reputable, biggest lawyers and law firms in the world, as you would expect. And so it formed a little bit of a David and Goliath. It was a David and Goliath. And so it was on the eve of the first motion to dismiss, which was later continued, that I was feeling particularly despondent, because I had realized that although it felt good, perhaps I had given the survivors false hope, which would be a form of cruelty. And I felt responsible. So I locked myself in my bathroom and I cried. I had a little pity party in my bathtub. And it was during that bath that I had an epiphany, a mommy's brief moment of clarity. And I said, well, why not just write a law? I mean, the statute of limitations is just what the legislature says. So I dashed out on a legal pad my ideas of a law. In fact, they were statute of limitations extended to this year, 2010. And the venue could be California if the survivor lived in California, if the company was licensed to do business in California and done significant, continuous, and substantial business so as to make it fair, to avail themselves of the California courts, which, by the way, would have provided punitive damages, which was very, very important in these situations, because you're not going to sue over a $1,000 policy. You're going to want to teach this industry a lesson so this never happens to anyone else again. And another miracle happened. On an $88 ticket, I was introduced to my person who came up, who was my assembly person, who said, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. Can I help?" And I said, "Yeah, I wrote a law." And he goes, "Sure you did." I go, "No, really." And he says, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Do you have $88? And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Let's go to Sacramento." And so that night, the girls and I made a little poster, and up to Sacramento I went. Now, I tell you this because I'm keenly aware that this has precious little to do with me and everything to do with destiny. And so we went up, and he persuaded the legislature, the assembly committee, to allow us to speak. And I was given 4 minutes, and I had my poster, and I pitched it, and they took a vote, and guess what? It passed. So I'm like, what? Whoa, I'm high-fiving, I'm getting all excited. Then I was reminded, no, that's just a committee, that doesn't mean it's law. And I said, what else do you need to do? I had forgotten from high school civics. He said, you have to go to the Senate. Where's that? He pointed. I said, okay, I don't leave. The plane doesn't leave till 4 o'clock. I'm going to the Senate. I did. Knocked on the doors, got into the Senate Judiciary Committee. John Burton at the time was the chair, and he was, I think, shicker because he allowed me to speak. He had a big red nose after lunch. I pitched it. Boom, they took a vote, unanimous, let's go on. Anyways, long story short, 31 days from my bathtub pity party, that became the law of the land. And that was to allow these cases to go forward. Now, since it has been challenged, since there was a Supreme Court case that said in another law that we wrote that these companies should have to reveal if they have these policies, or at least investigate if they do have them. And if they do, give them to the insurance commissioners and they'll make it public. That was a squeaker in a 5-4. That was lost. It was found that to force these companies to disclose these policies would interfere with the President of the United States' ability to conduct foreign affairs, a massive blow to this campaign. Nonetheless, because the company was caught lying in one of these hearings, they had signed a declaration under penalty of perjury that their argument was it's unfair to litigate in California. We should litigate where the contract was signed, where the parties lived. And that was a very valid and strong argument that we had to overcome. But they also said that we had no offices in California, no number in California, didn't sell policies in California, didn't know how to spell California or pronounce it. It would be unfair. My colleague had hired a private investigator, and we didn't know this, but the morning of the hearing, which is now on court TV tape, he hands him the notebook, and there was over 109 lawsuits that company had filed in California, 5 of which they filed after the motion to dismiss. So the judge did not take kindly, and not only did the motion to dismiss was that denied, but I was flapping my wings about Uncle Adolf having had 4 heart attacks and this being so very time sensitive. She set a trial date. Boom, first time in history we're going to right a historic wrong. We're going to do it here in Los Angeles, and we're going to let 12 people decide what it's worth. And that was met with a settlement in about, a few breaths after that. The inventory grew. The issue became more complex. Those survivors would call up and say, Lisa, I don't know, I can't prove that I had insurance. I know I had it, I can't prove it. And we said, I know, that's why we're trying to force them to disclose. But they said, I know I was a slave laborer. Lisa, I work for Siemens, Crew, BMW, Volkswagen. Lisa, write us a law. So this time, we worked with Michael Bazyler, and Tom Hayden was a legislative sponsor, and some good people, far smarter and better resource than myself. And we passed the Holocaust Victim Slave Labor Act, which mirrored the insurance, but substituted the word slave labor. We expanded what survivors can be viewed as, and that passed. But instead of litigation, Germany and German industry came to the American government and Israel and Jewish organizations and said, you know what, we'll cough up a settlement fund in exchange for immunity. And that's indeed what happened. And it's a long, ugly, complicated, very interesting story. All this is. But I want to conclude by saying that this is, after all, the National Jewish Law Students Association, that in our tradition, we view each life as being invaluable, priceless. And you are put on this earth, you are unique, and you are given God-given skills, and now you're going to be lawyers. And that's a particular skill set. And you have the opportunity to improve the world, however you define that, to see areas that need improvement, to help people that need help. And it's a very, very noble profession and an extraordinary opportunity that I hope this gives you a little bit of chizuk, a little bit of encouragement to know. I have every confidence you will be wonderful lawyers, and not only that, but humanitarians, and you will make the world a better place with your skill set.
I think my lecture could be over in one sentence. I just followed what Lisa Stern did. Everything she did, I just followed that. But I will explain to you. First, with Michael Bazyler.
I'll put the Barutians on. So
Okay. This is the 95th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. And Lemkin was the one who kept studying the Armenian issues. And I found out that he had written something on Armenians. It was not easy to find, but eventually I ended up at the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York, and I found a discarded box including Lemkin's papers. And in those papers, there was a 105-page report that he had typed with errors and so on, on the Armenian genocide. He had footnotes, the whole thing. It was written, I believe, 1947, so in terms of resources and sources, it was a little out of date. I decided to publish that, just change the title a little bit, saying Raphael Lemkin and the Armenian Genocide. Obviously, he didn't have the word genocide there, but we added that. And I had Professor Bazyler write the introduction. In the introduction, he came up with a narrative that Lemkin had said that he had suffered from genociditis, right? I have to say that I think I'm suffering from the same thing. It's 25 years that in my law office, I only deal with what the Holocaust cases, restitution cases were. And we have been very successful because the avenues have been opened by what has been happening. There is a lawyer's adage that if you have the law on your side, you should argue the law. If you have the facts on your side, you should argue the facts. And if you have neither, then you should start pounding the table. From the Holocaust cases, I learned that that's exactly what they were doing. They were pounding the table, they were attacking the companies and so on, and this is what we did. Well, the way it started was in 1987 for me. I was reading a biography of Henry Morgenthau, who was the American ambassador in Turkey. And in page 339, all at once he narrates the following. He said he went to see Talhat Pasha, who was one of the triumvirates running the Ottoman Empire. He was also the Minister of Interior and eventually became the minister, the Prime Minister. And Talhat told him, the Armenians are all dead. We know there were American insurance companies here. We want a list of the Armenians. Since there are no Armenians, under our law, it escheats to the government of Turkey. So we want a list. Morgenthau narrates that he got mad. He stood up and said, "You will get no such list from me," and walked out of the office. I jumped out of bed and I said, "There is a list. We have to find this list." So the next day in the office, I told my staff, we're going to get into some new cases here. We have to find these insurance policies. And I said, I'm going to write a letter. And I wrote a letter to the then Secretary of State, Schultz. My office staff were skeptical. They decided, you write the letter to Secretary of State, you are not going to get an answer. 2 weeks later, someone from the State Department answered and said, well, I had to put the letter, I had to put the copy of the book, I had to explain who Henry Morgenthau was so that the one who reads understands. And I got an answer from the State Department basically saying, the documents you want are old. These documents are at the National Archives, so we referred your letter to the National Archives. You should get a response from them. Well, my office staff started snickering and saying, you see, we're getting the runaround from the government. 2 weeks later, I get an answer from National Archives. And they say, we don't know about the list, but you got to give us some help. Can you give us some buzzwords? So I wrote to them saying, Armenian, Greek, Jewish, insurance, Christian, insurance, life insurance, fire insurance. I sent these buzzwords, and again, a couple of weeks later, I got an answer saying, we have enough information, and if you send us $178.20, we will send you a microfilm. That's the fastest bill I remember ever paying, And they did send me a microfilm. I didn't know what to do with the microfilm. So it's in Glendale, I remember we went to the Glendale library, and the only machine that was operating, they had 3 machines, and the only machine that was operating, you had to keep putting 10 cents every time to get a page, Well, I went through all this, and it was really 594 pages of documents, and it's a paper trail. There are letters from the government, letters from the General Council of New York Life saying, the Armenians have been killed. We are exposed, $10,284,000 and so on. What are we going to do? We have been here. Then Armenians have been writing letters. Greeks, Armenians, have been writing letters. What they did is they are very enterprising people. You have to give them credit. They are being deported, but what do? They go to the American consulate, and there were 14 consulates in the Ottoman Empire, and they make a payment. Well, you make a payment, you have to give the policy number, and the consul has got this money, he doesn't know what to do with it, so he sends it to Constantinople. Constantinople sends it to the State Department. The State Department sends it to New York Life, and New York Life says, thank you, keep us informed, They left a paper trail. There were a lot of names and so on. The most important letter, as far as I was concerned, was from the General Counsel of New York Life saying, we are exposed $10,281,000, and we need your help. There was also a lot of other information that came through. Why was New York Life there? You would wonder, why would New York Life go all the way to the Ottoman Empire, and sell insurance? New York Life sold more insurance in the Ottoman Empire than in 21 states in the United States. It was a lucrative business, life wasn't much of a premium over there, so, people had to get, they obviously were not selling flood insurance or earthquake insurance, they were selling life insurance, and people were buying. I think from the information that I gathered in that 600 pages, and then I went to the National Archives 3 times, and I got more documents. So altogether, I had about 10,000 pages of documents, Then I am with documents, and I have to find a client, right? So I decided to, being an old-timer, I didn't want to advertise and say, anyone has any insurance policies with New York Life, get in touch with me. So I said, anyone with some papers, that relate to American companies in the turn of the century. Anyway, I got a couple thousand letters. Armenians sent letters, they sent pictures, they X'd the people that had died in the pictures, group pictures like you saw. And I kept saying, I'm looking for New York Life, I'm looking for New York Life. Finally, a woman from Irvine, California, she wrote me a letter, she says, I think I got what you want. So I made an appointment and went to see her, and so on, and sure enough, she had the insurance policy, she had the letters she had written to New York Life, and I said, New York Life is telling you, why don't you bring us a death certificate? Why don't you bring birth certificate? Did you do it? I said, we don't know how to do it. Where are we going to get it? Anyway, they had corresponded really for 40 years. Every year they wrote 1 or 2 letters, but nothing came out of it. Now I had a client. What do I do with it? I file a lawsuit. The first thing they're going to come up with is the statute of limitation. So I kept thinking, and I had drafts of a complaint, the genocide. There is no statute of limitation on genocide. But then New York Life didn't commit the genocide. The Turks committed the genocide. So I had to get the Turks in there. Then we got into a big hassle with the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act and so on. So there I was at a loss until Lisa Stern filed her lawsuit. The day she filed the lawsuit, I tried to get copies, and I was trying to see how she was going to resolve the statute of limitation. Then I see Lisa, the cover of the California Lawyers magazine, and it was because she had gone to the legislature and had gotten a new piece of legislation. And I was saying, well, here we go back to political science. We have to use the 3 branches of the government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. So I did the same thing. I called the state senator. I called the former governor, Dukmajian, and said, how do I do this? And he said, why don't you call this one Armenian senator we have from Fresno? So I called him. We sat down and wrote the same legislation. We changed the area, geographic area. We changed the years, And then I got some advice saying, this registry that the Jewish legislation had done, might be challenged. And we had no problem about registry. New York Life is an American company, We're not worried about the European companies. Anyway, so I didn't put that portion in there. And we went and testified before the Judiciary Committee with the Marutian, showed them the insurance policies and the family pictures and the exes who were killed and so on. I think it took, like Lisa said, 10 minutes of testimony. The Judiciary Committee unanimously approved it, and it went through the Senate. Within 6 months, the legislation was unanimously approved and signed by the then Governor Davis. So we were in court. We filed a lawsuit with the legislation. I have to tell you, I corresponded a year before with New York Life. I said, this is a class lawsuit. I don't want to file a lawsuit, but we should negotiate and so on. Eventually, they came up and said, look, we know Marutian. We found out some, documents. We will pay Marutian, but there is no class. They said, no good, So we went ahead to file with the class. When you look at these documents, it's interesting. What were these companies doing there? There were 102 insurance companies in the Ottoman Empire. 60 from Britain, 50 from France, 20 from Germany, all over the place, and they were selling life insurance. Some were selling also fire insurance. They were all there. They had offices over there, and now we have the First World War starting. What do? They close their offices. Some of them are antagonistic, the Germans and the French and the British. The Americans, New York Life closes the offices and leaves. What are the Armenians supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? Where do they make their monthly or, bi-yearly payments? There was no answer to that until later on, when we started negotiating with New York Life. We filed a lawsuit. We started negotiating with them. They wanted support from the United States government, right? First place they go is to the US government. The attorney for New York Life was John Foster Dulles. He was with the firm Sullivan Cromwell in New York. There were 8 people in the firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, Anyway, he wrote a letter to the State Department saying, we need help here. How are we going to deal with this situation? The letter went to the Near Eastern Department, and the head of the Near Eastern Department was Alan Dulles, the brother of John Foster Dulles. And he wrote a letter saying, we don't get involved in private business. That's your problem. You solve your own problem. And I'm sure most of you know Alan Dulles was the one that set up the CIA a few years later. But with no recourse, New York Life, there was a French company, L'Union, a very big company, much bigger than New York Life. L'Union was selling insurance all over the place, and L'Union, like New York Life, they were following the missionaries, the schools, the French schools, L'Union was there. The American schools, New York Life was there. There were over 1,000 American schools in the Ottoman Empire. So we had the names of 42 agents selling insurance for New York Life. But the French, they kept saying, we follow the flag. Wherever the flag goes, we go. So we supported the French all this time. Now the government should support us. And the French government said, yes, we will support you. The minute New York Life heard that the French were going to government was going to support the French, they transferred all the insurance policies to the French. Until 5 years ago, I checked the records of L'Union, and L'Union had a special section, the board of directors, dealing with the New York Life files. They were still, until 5 years ago, dealing with it. I don't know, some of them maybe were 40-year term. It was still going on, whatever it was. They were still reporting in the board of directors. Did the French get any money? I think they did. The French government, we cannot find any files that L'Union ever got these monies compensation. As far as New York Life was concerned, I have to say, to their credit, they didn't know this story. This is all new to them. So when we approached them and told them about this, they had to go to their files. And talking to the general counsel, he said, I don't think we will find these files, you know. I mean, these are too old and so on. Anyway, we took the deposition of the person who was in charge of the files. And interestingly enough, he kept saying, you know, they have the size of a football field, they have documents of each state, and then when the statute runs out, they burn the documents that are there. But he said there was one vault, you know, a room-sized vault. And he says there were documents there, and there were stamps saying, never destroy these records. And those were the records from the Ottoman Empire. So we went through the records, and eventually we came up with 2,300 policies that were not paid. And we settled with New York Life for $20 million for those policies. We also filed a lawsuit against AXA, the French insurance company that owns l'Union, and we settled that it was on the back burner as the lawsuit was going. As far as the statute was concerned, we were lucky to have the federal judge, Christina Schneider. She ruled that the statute is constitutional, that it was an expeditious way for people to file lawsuits in the state of California, and it was constitutional. It didn't violate the Commerce Clause or the Foreign Affairs Doctrine. Interestingly enough, that when we filed these lawsuits, when she ruled on this, the issue of venue was important. New York Life came up with 2 insurance policies. They didn't print a new insurance policy when they were selling in the Ottoman Empire. They had one in English, one in French. And basically, the one in English, as to if you have any conflict where you should go, it says London. It doesn't say London, England. It doesn't say London, United Kingdom. It just says London, because it was sold in the British Empire. The French was even worse. It didn't say you have to file in Paris. It says you have to file at Seine-et-Oise. I mean, you have to know French pretty well to know that that's the district within which Paris is located. Why would some poor Armenian in Eastern Anatolia know where it is? How would they go there? You have to get a police permit, a visa to go from one village to the other, just like the Jews at one time had to get it in Germany. So it was almost impractical. And the judge said, anyway, her ruling goes through. What we did with New York Life, we filed New York Life, we got the 20 million. We set up a settlement board. We put the names on the internet. 5,800 people applied for the 2,300 insurance policies. Interestingly enough, only 1,600 policies were applied. 700, no one applied, meaning we didn't get the information out to everybody, or that they were all dead. That family didn't exist anymore. You know, there's no one left from that family. New York Life had index cards for each person, which I found fascinating because it's the first time we got the addresses of some 7,600 Armenians living in Turkey. They have the addresses, they have the profession. Many of the cards had the children too. Anyway, that was an interesting discovery. The French were not that nice. All they did is a registration. So they registered, and sometimes we found the same name 5, 6 times. So we didn't know if he bought 5, 6 new insurance policies or if he wasn't making the payments and he was getting a new one. The French gave us a lot of trouble in terms of the Jewish cases, saying they were not going to allow us to place the names on the internet. And we said, why not? We want the names on the internet. They gave us all this, privacy, jazz, and we went to the Prime Minister of France and said, we want this on the internet. How else are they going to apply? It made it so difficult. You apply, you give your name, and if it rings a bell, then they will say there is on the list, the name is on the list, and so on. Anyway, we finally won that, As of February 1, the money is being distributed on the AXA cases. A couple other insurance case, we have Victoria. Victoria was a German company. They had about 500 insurance policies, Armenians, and we wanted to settle with them, but they wouldn't. They attacked the statute, and the statute went to the Ninth Circuit Court, and the Ninth Circuit Court ruled against us. We have asked for saying it impinges on the foreign policy of the United States, because when I wrote the legislation, I said anyone being killed in 1915 to 1923, the period known as the Armenian Genocide. Because I used those words, they said that impinges on the foreign policy, even though the United States has no policy on the Armenian Genocide. Anyway, we have asked for a rehearing, and we are hoping that they will give us a rehearing soon. And Deutsche Bank, quickly, couple minutes I have. On the Deutsche Bank, I filed 3 classes. One is slave labor, second, looted assets, and third, depositors. They threw slave labor out, saying this is not a judiciable issue. They threw the looted assets out. The judge ruled against us, saying, hey, Armenian Americans, we settled with Germany after the First World War. And we said, this has nothing to do with the war. This is genocide. And the judge ruled against us, saying, no, it is not. As far as Turkey was concerned, because Turkey isn't, and he says, you cannot sue Turkey either, because there is an agreement. They called it the Ankara Agreement, and some bureaucrat from the State Department had gone to settle damages, United States damages vis-a-vis Turkey, and they settled for $1.2 million, and they included the Armenian Genocide in there. Anyway, that's an issue that we are going to be fighting on. There is 2-3 other lawsuits that we have filed on insurance, which is stayed now because of the Ninth Circuit Court, and we're waiting for the Ninth Circuit Court. Well, in conclusion, I have to say that one of my favorite guys is Mahatma Gandhi. He had made a very interesting statement. He said, first, they will laugh at us. Then they will ignore us. Then they will fight us. Then we will win. Thank you.